everyone. Welcome to the Your Life Unfiltered podcast with your hosts, Nikhil Thari and Deepa. In this podcast, we dig deep into the life experiences of our guests that connect the dots between their early upbringing and what they're doing today. Today, we have a very special guest, Pothik Chatterjee. Pothik is an abstract artist. Pothik, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Pothik, and I'm really excited to share my art journey and the connected dots between my upbringing and my artist experiences today.
Excellent. Thanks for joining, Pothik. And before we talk about any of those things, why don't we go back a few years? Talk to us a little bit more about your early childhood, early upbringing. How was that experience? I know you've lived across different cities such as Dubai, Paris, etc., and maybe try to connect with what you're doing today.
Sure, thank you. So I am what is known as a third culture kid, or TCK, and that refers to someone who is born and raised in a different culture than their own, and has traveled typically around the globe. So I was born in India, in Kolkata, in 1984, but I have never lived in India. My parents were already living in Dubai, so I grew up there for the first 7 years of my life. And my dad is a computer programmer for an oil and gas company, and he was in the management level, so we were transferred from Dubai to Paris, which was the headquarters of the company at the time. So I did my second grade till sixth grade in Paris, and then we moved back to the United Arab Emirates to Abu Dhabi, the capital, which is where I did my middle school years. And in 10th grade, we moved to Jakarta, Indonesia, and that's where I completed my high school at Jakarta International School. And although I never lived in India, about 99% of my extended family still lives in Kolkata, with a few family members in Mumbai as well. So we still had a really close connection to India. Every year for the summer months, for about 3 months, we would spend time in Kolkata with my grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins. And sometimes we would even go twice a year for the winter holidays as well. So because we were moving around so much, India was always a base for us in terms of family and culture, and keeping us connected with our origins.
Okay, wow. Well, to start off, I've never heard of a third culture kid before, so that's really interesting. I've not heard of that before. First time hearing that, but it makes sense as you explain what it means.
Yeah, most of my classmates, or all of my classmates, were third culture kids because I went to international schools, starting in Paris. Before that, I was at an Indian school in Dubai. But at the international schools, everyone came from all over the world. So there were Americans, Australians, different parts of Europe, different parts of Asia, but we were all getting educated in a basically American style of education, but in a totally different culture.
Wow, that's fascinating.
No, I'm just curious to see how much of, what kind of experiences or what kind of thought processes must be happening while you were at these schools where you're actually in somewhere, totally different culture, and you're trying to find trying to find your identity. So did you also have some of those identity struggles while you were growing up, or were you like comfortable with your, whatever you brought to the table?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think in some ways I was very confused about my identity because I was not the same as my family members in India who were going to school in India, working in India, immersed in the Indian culture. But yet I wasn't American either because I'd never lived in the United States until I came here for undergrad at the age of 17. But I was taught by American and international teachers and had international classmates, and, very exposed to American culture because that is kind of the dominant culture in international schools. So I was very confused about my identity because at school I was learning about American values or European values, and then at home It was still a very Bengali Hindu Indian culture. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, maybe because I was not in the United States and all of my classmates were experiencing similar cultural identity evolutions, being from different parts of the world, we were all going through it together. So the best analogy I can give is the United Nations. Literally, I had friends from Japan, Nigeria, the United States, from India. So it was really a really cool way to grow up because as a
Mm-hmm.
kid, I saw that there's so much beauty in different cultures and different foods and different religions and different ways of thinking, that there doesn't have to be
Mm-hmm.
one dominant way, that there's lots of different approaches and they're all valid. And I think that was a really special way to grow up. And it also made me super adaptable because every 3 or 4 years, we were moving to a new country and getting into a new house, starting a new school, dealing with new
Right.
teachers and classmates, new languages, new cultures. So the best thing about it was that it made me and my family really adaptable, and figure out how to be flexible and find the good in every situation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I can imagine is if you're changing countries every 4 or 5 years, that is a really big change, especially during your developmental years, right? Because you said you spend your first 7 years in one country and then move to the next and then moved about every couple of years. So I can imagine how resilient it made you because it's like a whole new world for you every time you switch countries. You basically know, I'm imagining very few people in the country that you moved to. So I guess one question I had based on that is how did you like do you have like a system to adapt when you move to a new country, like if you were to do it today?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, System to adapt. I feel like as a kid, me and my sister, I have a younger sibling, um, we really followed our parents as role models, and they were super positive and really immersed themselves into the local culture. So, for example, I remember, well, Dubai was kind of like a mini India back in the late 80s and early 90s when we were there, because there's so many Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and Sri Lankans in Dubai. So it really didn't feel very foreign to me and my parents and my sister because we had so many fellow Bengalis that we surrounded ourselves with. We went to the temple for Durga Puja, and my parents were really active in the local community, and they loved their time in Dubai. So it didn't really feel very foreign. But I remember when we moved to Paris, that was a big difference. Obviously, moving from Dubai to living in the city of Paris and going to international school of Paris. I remember my dad took French classes at Alliance Francaise and bought books by French authors and spent his free time on the weekends really trying to get to know the language and the culture. And so that really inspired me through my life that whenever I'm in a new situation, to try to be as open and learn about how the locals do things, rather than just try to stay in an expat bubble with other foreigners. So I think that was really formative. My mother also, when we lived in Paris, she's an art lover. She's not an artist herself, but she really appreciates art. And I remember she took me and my sister to all the big museums in Paris, like the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay. And I saw all these masterpieces like Mona Lisa and Van Gogh and Monet's water lilies when I was 9 years old or 10 years old. So it left a really big mark. And so I think that my style or lessons of adaptation are to really immerse yourself in the local culture, learn the things that the locals do, and be open minded and be open to learning.
Okay. Wow, you
Got it.
mentioned a lot of famous artists. The one question I have based on that is of all those different artists that you have now been exposed to, right, at a young age, who is your favorite?
Um, So that has evolved a bit since I was a kid to now being an adult. But when I was a kid, my favorite artist was Leonardo da Vinci,
Okay.
because he was a Renaissance man. Not only was he a painter, but he was also an inventor. He studied the human anatomy, and he was interested. I think he invented um, helicopters and things that can fly. He invented things for the military. So I was always really fascinated how one person can be so interested in so many different topics. And I also really love his technical skill and his portraits of the Madonna, the baby Jesus, and all of the different scenes, and the way he plays with light and darkness. He was my favorite artist growing up. I would say as an adult, I am more inspired by the abstract expressionism movement from the 1960s in the US. Um, I love Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and a lot of the artists from that time period because of the way they are so expressive with color and movement in an
Mhm.
abstract medium.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, just a quick sidebar, Ketul. I know we talk a lot about, being a jack of all trade, and it sounds to me that Leonardo da Vinci was one of the first, actually not jack, but probably a master of all trades. So, there we are, just connecting that dot with our podcast here. But coming back to what Pothik you said, first of all, thanks for sharing all of that. I guess one question I really had, so obviously you had all these inspirations, influences from these leading artists living in the city of Paris, and just getting exposed to the who's who of the art world. But how, did you start painting around this time yourself, or was it just you're just like soaking in and just focusing on studies or some other things, but not really focusing on paint? How has that process started for you?
Yeah, no, I've been actively doing art since I was about 4 years old. Um, I remember when I was in Dubai, I had done a color pencil drawing of a house with a tree and a plane or helicopter.
Hmm.
And it was published in the local magazine called Young Times that the children would read in Dubai. And that was a moment of pride for me at such a young age. But I've always been really interested in art as a child, mainly
Right.
through art class in school. And I kept doing that all through elementary school, middle school, and into high school. And maybe it was a way for me to have a common theme as I was dealing with so many changes, like different countries, different continents, different schools, different friends, different teachers. So art was something that I consistently kept doing all the way into senior year of high school. Um, and then when I
Gotcha.
was in college, I took one studio art class when I was at Georgetown University, my senior year. And that was a really formative experience because I was able to learn a lot of technical skills like figure
Hmm.
drawing, portrait drawing, perspective. And my professor was really, really supportive of my talent. So it was a really great experience.
That's great. That's great. And of all those different creative mediums, do you have one that was your favorite? I'm assuming it was painting because that seems like the central theme in the dialogue. But at the same time, I don't want to assume. So, is there like a certain medium that really resonates with you the most?
Yeah, I love that question. So the medium for me is painting and specifically acrylic paint on canvas.
Right.
Um,
Gotcha.
and that's something that's fairly new because after I took that studio art college at Georgetown, I stopped
Hmm.
doing art for the next 20 years of my life,
Oh,
which
20.
is
Wow. That is a long period of time.
yeah, because when I graduated from college, I was really focused on building a career in a more traditional sense. So I worked
Hmm.
in finance for about 4 years, and then I attended Harvard Business School for my MBA. And after I graduated from my MBA, I shifted into healthcare. So I did healthcare innovation at two different health systems. one in Boston, and then one in Baltimore. So I was really focused on building my career and establishing myself. So I didn't do really any art since that senior year of class. And the time that I picked it up again was in March 2020 when the pandemic started. And I found myself in a pandemic bubble in
Mm.
Baltimore, and I had a lot more time on my hands. So I decided, with all of this stress going on in my job, working for a health system during COVID-19, and all the death and sickness and stress happening around the world with the pandemic, what can I
Mhm.
do that will really be calming and de-stressing and healing? So I turned to the internet and I found online classes with specifically two teachers. So the first one was with Princeton University Arts Council in New Jersey. Somehow
Mhm.
they popped up on my Facebook feed, and I found out that they had free classes every Thursday on Zoom. And it's taught by a wonderful illustrator, and her name is Barbara Di Lorenzo, and she's actually a children's book illustrator. And I took those classes every week for a few months, and it kind of brought me back to the lessons I had learned in school about perspective, sketching, values, shading, and different types of objects and people for drawing. And this was all drawing. So that kind of rekindled my love for art in 2020. And then I found a second teacher who's an Israeli artist based in New York City. And I found her through Instagram because I really loved her really colorful pastel drawings of flowers and botanicals.
Mhm.
And she offered free classes on the weekends as well through Zoom. And she was really special because she taught me about intuitive painting, which was a brand new concept. I don't know if you guys know what that means.
Um, I've heard of it, but I don't know too much. But before we dig into that, one thing that I wanted to mention is that there's a reason both of us like smiled when you said your painting journey started during COVID-19, the early pandemic, is because it's funny, but we've seen that pattern with a lot of people we've interviewed. I guess, the start of the pandemic was like a life-setting moment for a lot of people because a lot of people's life reset at that moment where they started going into other places in their life that, because now
Mhm.
they had the excess time, they pour their energy into, right? So, like, for example, we brought on a couple of different content creators and we asked them on the timing what got them started. And all of them unanimously basically said that they started during the early pandemic. So I found that particularly interesting is that, the same thing happened for you, Pathik, where it's, the early pandemic kind of allowed you to reset your life where it allowed you to go back to what you used to love to do when you were much younger.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me because it was such a critical time in the world and in people's lives where the usual activities and sources of entertainment and meaning that we could turn to were shut off. So we really had to go deep within to figure out what makes us tick. Where do we find meaning in this new reality? And I think it's beautiful that there's so many content creators who found that inspiration within and are able to share that with the world.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. With that said, you did mention a new piece of art. Do you want to elaborate on
Yeah,
that?
so it's called intuitive painting, and I don't know if I'm going to do a great job of explaining it, um, but it's basically about following the brush stroke intuitively to, let's say, you're painting a vase of flowers. You don't have to literally copy it like you would as if you're trying to do a photorealistic painting. It's more about capturing the energy of the flowers and the way the light hits the flowers. So this teacher of mine, Lital Gold, she would add a lot of really bright colors that might not even exist in nature if you were to look at this vase of flowers. But when you look at the end product, it makes sense because of the reflection and the contrast. And it just makes you view the vase of flowers in a new way or helps you capture the emotion of what is being painted. So it's also about not just the end result, but the process of how you make that art. So that was really transformative for me because coming from an MBA background and working in business, I tend to be very logical and very rational and left-brained, but by following this intuitive painting theory, I was really able to let go and just kind of follow my emotion and my intuition about where the painting is taking me. So that was really, really helpful. So those were the two teachers I had in 2020 and 2021. And after those Zoom classes, I did sign up for an oil painting class with Barbara Di Lorenzo, and I really enjoyed it, but I realized that I'm not quite ready for oil painting as a medium because it requires a very high level of technical expertise and it requires a lot of patience as well. And my teacher recommended acrylic painting because it dries super fast, like within a minute. So if you make a mistake or if you want to add a different layer or take it in a different direction, you can do it really fast. So that's how I got into acrylic painting. And all of my childhood, I didn't really do that much painting. I mainly did drawing. So this was something new for me and that started in 2020.
Okay. I wanted to take a step back into one point you mentioned, which was capturing like the essence of what you see or the energy of what you see. So that has me thinking, so that's capturing emotion and energy from what you're seeing. What about evoking emotion into your painting? So what I mean by that is, do you paint differently based on your state of mind or your emotional state while you're painting? So for example, would the way you paint when you're angry be very different than the way you paint when you're calm and relaxed? And if so, can you tell us about like the differences, at least in your experience? I don't know if you painted when you're angry before, but I'm curious.
And just to kind of quickly extrapolate, sorry, Pothik, just to quickly extrapolate on that, what is your typical process of painting, right? So is it a mix of both what Ketul said, or is it like one or the other?
Yeah, so love both of the questions. It took me some time to figure out what is my process with my abstract paintings, but here's what I've landed on currently, and it is always evolving too. But here's my process right now. I'll typically start with a white or gray background to fill the canvas, and then I'll do anywhere between 4 to 7 or even 8 layers of paint on top of it. And that's to create a lot of interesting visual detail, to create texture from the layers of paint, and really build an interesting story through the painting. And that can take me usually about 2 weeks to complete a painting because I'm creating so many layers, and sometimes I'll step away and come back after a day or two and attack the canvas with a new, fresh perspective. So that's been my approach. And the way that I know that a painting is done is when I look at it and it feels like organic or alive. Like I didn't actually paint it, it was always there. Somehow it got just kind of revealed or unearthed. And it was just always part of nature. That's how I feel like, okay, now the painting is complete. But to answer your question, Ketul, about the impact of emotional state on the type of painting, I would say usually painting has a very calming effect on me if I'm stressed out or angry or frustrated. Just the act of painting and getting in my studio gets me more relaxed because it's very meditative. So usually I'll light candles or incense and play relaxing music to create a really comforting and relaxing environment. So the act of painting and the environment really helps create that calm, serene emotion that I try to bring into the painting. But there have been times where I have been experiencing stress due to life events like illnesses with family members, for example. And during those stressful times, I have noticed that darkness and that moodiness does come into the painting, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. If anything, I think it's added more depth and more complexity and more, like emotional soul into the painting. And yeah, I've embraced it. I think when you're a painter, you have to embrace whatever emotions are coming in. There's not anything good or bad. There's no right or wrong. It's about emotional authenticity and like transferring that from your heart into the canvas.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like art is now a really big piece of your life, right? So I guess my question for you is, what are you doing to promote that artwork?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I only started selling my paintings less than a year ago. I was painting really for myself into 2020, 2021. But in February of 2022, last year, I've always had this dream growing up that one day my paintings will be shown in a real life gallery. And I had gone to a gallery in Baltimore in September or October, the fall before, because they organized this thing called First Fridays, where you can go to multiple galleries and meet the artists and get some wine and cheese. So it's a fun social event. And I went to this one gallery called Highlandtown Gallery in Baltimore and met a wonderful artist named Sierra Faith, who I really connected with. And I loved her art. And I asked her, how did you get into this gallery? How did you, what are the inside secrets of the art industry so that I can follow in your footsteps? And she was really sweet and wonderful and really shared her experiences and introduced me to the owner of the gallery, whose name is Felicia. And I met her and I gathered the courage about a couple of months later. So this was September. And in February of 2022, I basically did a cold call. I made an appointment and I showed up with 5 of my best paintings. And I said, hey, what do you think? Would you ever be willing to show my paintings in your gallery? And it was one of the most nerve-wracking things that I've ever done, because art is so personal and it's so intimate, like you're bearing your soul on canvas. And the thought of rejection is so scary because it almost might feel like a rejection of you and your talent. But I said, what the heck? I have a business background. I have an MBA. I'm used to having an entrepreneurial spirit and dealing with rejection. I can deal with this, and I think I'm good. So I showed her the paintings, and she said they're beautiful. So that was a huge relief that it met her expectation. But she said, I don't have an opening for another year because you just missed my new artist show that I do in January and February. So you're going to have to wait till January of 2023. So initially I was crushed because I thought she was going to say, you're the next Picasso. I'm going to make space for you in March or April. But I didn't lose hope because people paint like decades before getting into a gallery. So for her to say that my art was gallery quality and that she was willing to give me a shot in less than a year was still really wonderful. And I didn't give up hope, and I started selling my paintings for the first time last summer in July. And since then, I've sold 30 paintings, and I would keep Felicia informed about my progress. And lo and behold, she invited me to her November show of last year. So that's when I had my first pop-up that got sold out with 5 paintings. That was also an amazing experience. And then she gave me 3 paintings to put on the wall in December. And then since then, I've had 2 more shows. I've had 4 shows total in less than a year. So it's just a great reminder to your listeners to not give up hope and stay positive and really believe in yourself and your talent.
Okay, wow. Yeah, that's a really inspirational story. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Pothik, I actually want to go back to one of the things that we were talking about before this particular topic about, your process of creating art and just really delving deep into your own emotions and trying to, just put it on the canvas. I guess my question is, abstract art can be really open to interpretation, right? So anybody can just look at it and they have their own sets of interpretation of that. How do you approach creative painting, and how do you hope your viewers will engage with the painting and interpret your work?
Yeah, I love that question. So there's kind of 3 different themes that I keep coming back to in my art. And the first is that as a gay South Asian man, I did deal with a lot of homophobia and some bullying when I was growing up as a kid. And it was, as you can imagine, even harder because I was changing schools and moving to new environments. And some of the places that I grew up with in the Middle East are particularly homophobic. And even in my conservative Bengali Hindu family upbringing, it was very unacceptable to be gay or lesbian or, God forbid, transgender in that kind of conservative mentality. So I had to be in the closet until I went to college. So that caused a lot of trauma for me as a child and as a teenager. Fortunately, I was able to come out to my parents in my late 20s, and we had a couple of months where it was a little tough, but they have been really accepting and really wonderful. So it's been a journey, and I'm very lucky to have met the love of my life. I've been married for 4 years, we've been together for 10 years. So it's been a journey, but all this to say that a big theme in my abstract art is going back to that time of childhood where I felt like I couldn't be openly my true self and express my full sexuality or gender identity. And so I'm doing that in my art today by bringing out what's considered traditionally more feminine colors like soft pastels, pink, the gold of the jewelry that my mother and my grandmother would wear. I put all of that into my art because in abstract art, like you said, I feel like there's not any of those traditional boundaries or notions of right or wrong. There's so much freedom. And for me, I'm putting that feeling from my childhood trauma as a gay South Asian person into my art. So that's probably the number one biggest theme that I put into a lot of my artwork. The second one is about Hinduism and my Indian culture. I feel extremely proud and connected with Indian culture, with my Bengali culture, and my Hindu background. I wouldn't say I'm very religious in like a conventional sense, but I'm very spiritual. And especially during the pandemic, I really got into meditation, starting my every day with morning meditation. I love yoga as a way to stay fit, but also stay mentally strong as well. So I try to bring in inspiration from Hindu gods and goddesses and mythology, yoga. One of my first paintings that really started my style of abstract art is called Shavasana, and it was inspired by a yoga class that I went to, and it was like a hot yoga class. It was really intense, and at the end, when we were all laying down in Shavasana, when I closed my eyes, I had the image that I painted, which was like blue and gold and all melting like twinkling stars. And I felt connected to the presence of my grandparents who have all passed away. But in that Shavasana, I felt like they were looking down on me and blessing me and protecting me. And that was kind of the start of the Shavasana style of paintings that I've done. So that's another big theme of my abstract art. And then the third one is nature, which inspires a lot of artists. I love natural landscapes. I love the ocean, the waves, plants, flowers. So a lot of my abstract art is not 100% abstract. If you look at it in different ways, you will see the composition might remind you of mountains or a valley or a beach scene. So there is a lot of natural inspiration as well.
Okay, wow. Well, that's very interesting. Your entire journey is very inspirational and aspirational. So again, thank you for sharing that.
Definitely, I can understand. Growing up as a gay person, it must be really hard, to face the homophobia. And my question really is that how has your experience and this is, going beyond art, and it's up to you how much ever you want to share. How do you think society's acceptance has evolved over the years since you were a kid versus now, of people who identify as LGBTQ? And are we moving in the right direction or not?
Yeah, I love that question. So I think we have progressed very, very significantly in some ways. but I think it's also restricted to upper class liberal elites in large cities and urban areas. When I think
Hmm.
about India specifically, and again, you can take my comments with a grain of salt because I didn't actually grow up in India. I've never lived there full
Right.
time. I'm basing this on visiting each year growing up and going back every couple of years now to visit my relatives. Um, but in terms of progress, it seems to be a lot more. Indian society seems to be a lot more accepting of gay relationships in metro
Hmm.
cities like Bombay and maybe Delhi, but Kolkata is still pretty conservative in some ways. And
Hmm.
also, some pockets are very liberal. I think also in our generation, or especially in the younger generation, because I'm 39 years old, I'm almost 40. But when I see like teenagers or college students, it's amazing to me how liberated and bold and open they seem to be. And maybe it's because of, time, but also mobile apps for online dating and being able to connect with members of the LGBT community that we didn't necessarily have when I was in college or high school. So it makes me really happy to see that there's been a lot of progress. I did quite a bit of LGBTQ advocacy work when I was a college student at Georgetown. This was before
Hmm.
gay marriage was legal in the United States. Um, and Georgetown's a Catholic university, so they have their own issues with homophobia and acceptance. But yeah, I'm super proud of the progress, but I do feel like it belongs to the privileged few. And if you're from a rural background, if you're from a lower caste background or economically not privileged, it seems to be still very challenging to be openly gay. And I think being openly lesbian is very tough. And as I mentioned before, the trans community is
Hmm.
still very much persecuted and not privileged. And I think as a community, we have a responsibility as a society, we have a responsibility to lift up all members of our human society, no matter what their sexual orientation or gender identity are. But I could talk for hours and hours about this topic. So I'm
Right.
curious, like, if you have any specific questions or thoughts of your own
No, no,
about
no.
what evolution we've
At this
seen.
point, yeah. Yeah, just wanted to keep it at high level. Just wanted to get your perspective. And I personally feel the social media has really, uh, played a huge role in making those some of these things normalized where they used to be considered, I don't want to use extreme words, but you know what I'm trying to say. So social media has really normalized a lot of,
I would say Bollywood
relationship
has
with
as well.
traditional.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
say
go for it.
Bollywood has as well. There's been a lot of movies in the last couple of years. And I think there was
Right.
one recently about a marriage of convenience between a
Hmm.
gay man and a lesbian woman and kind of the problems and issues that they were facing. I think Ayushmann Khurrana was the lead actor. But yeah, when I was growing up, I think Dostana was the only movie, and it was more like a joke and more like a
Yeah. Yeah.
ridicule, or even in Kal Ho Na Ho, where Saif Ali Khan and Shah Rukh Khan were thought to be in a gay relationship. It was really like a punchline and a joke. But I'm really glad to
Yeah.
see that there's more humane and nuanced depictions of more realistic gay people today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Pothik, so thanks so much for sharing that really insightful conversation. I guess we are ready to move to the next section of our discussion, just to get to know a little bit better on a personal level. We call it rapid fire. So as the name suggests, first thing that comes to mind, and when you're ready, we'll jump right in. All right. So we'll start with an easy one: tea or coffee?
Oh, definitely coffee. I love
Okay.
coffee.
All right. Mountains or beaches?
Beaches,
Okay. Morning person or night owl?
night owl. Yeah,
I
that's
can
where I
see
get my
why.
most inspiration from painting. Yeah.
I was just gonna say that it's they say in like studies is that for most people they're most creative at nighttime because like you get tired from all the stuff you're doing throughout the day. So at nighttime, your brain tries to find shortcuts, and when your brain's trying to find shortcuts, it just finds interesting ways of doing things. So
I do. Yeah, I think you're right because I am productive in the morning, but it's not on creative stuff. It's more like my list of things to do, my day job, my professional planning that I have to do. But for creative stuff, it comes to life at night.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, what's your favorite comfort food?
Ooh, my favorite comfort food is dal, rice, and my mom's fried eggplant. All of those things together.
Okay,
It's
interesting.
a Bengali specialty.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Um, what's your favorite virtue in others?
Honesty,
Okay,
Okay. What's your biggest pet peeve?
inauthenticity.
okay, that's a
Okay.
good one.
Okay. Um, what's your secret superpower?
Mm. Self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
I
Okay.
hope. I hope it is. Yeah.
Wow. No, that's a big one actually. It's really a big one. Okay.
It doesn't
What's
always
a super?
come through in every situation, but I
Yeah.
have the ability to tap into it.
Okay.
I guess as an artist, I think I'm sure it really helps you as well, right? Because you can channelize those type of emotions in your art as well.
Oh, definitely. I think that even before making one painting, you have to spend months, if not years, into self-reflection and really getting to know yourself before you put anything out there. So that's very true.
Awesome. What's a superpower you wish you had?
And it can be
This can be
unrealistic.
unrealistic.
Being able to fly.
Okay, fly. That's a good one. So then you can get like a
All
bird's
right.
eye view and get inspiration from that, I guess, for paintings.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I love to travel. I mean, maybe it's because I grew up in so many different countries, but I love to travel. My name actually means traveler in Bengali. So
Oh, wow.
Pothik means someone who's on the path of life. And so if I had the ability to fly, I could fly to Portugal tomorrow or fly to Peru, which would be my dream. I'd be so happy to be able to
So
travel
then,
so easily.
Okay. So I guess I mean that brings us to the end of the rapid fire, but just wondering what's next for you, given with the art that you're working on, plus your professional life, what's coming next for you?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. So I am trying to manifest several things in my art journey for 2023. Um, it's a dream of mine to show my art in a New York City gallery because that's such an epicenter for artists across the world for some of the best
Hmm.
contemporary art. So I have been speaking with one gallery in Chelsea, so I'm hoping to be able to show my paintings there in later this spring or maybe early fall. I would love
Hmm.
to show my paintings in on the West Coast as well. I think LA is such a artistic city with some great contemporary art. So
Hmm.
those are the two goals that I have. I would love to have a solo exhibition one day. I've done group shows and pop-up shows, but it's always a goal of an artist to be able to do a solo show that features, a wide range of the artists. But beyond that, I think just generally, I want to be able to connect with more South Asians in the US around my art and
Hmm.
engage in a conversation about how where we belong in American society and the
You're
future
right.
of America. Because I do think that there's kind of a revolution happening today with South Asian Americans. And, you know, you see it in politics with the vice president, with Kamala Harris. You see it in Hollywood with Priyanka Chopra and Natu Natu being performed at the Oscars this year. So I
Hmm.
think there's lots of different avenues of American life where South Asian content creators and innovators are really being
Hmm.
heard And so I'm really excited to continue to be part of that movement.
Really look forward to your exhibition to some time in San Francisco as well. I know San Francisco is also one of the largest places or most famous places where you can find a lot of contemporary artists. So hopefully, sooner rather than later, there will be an exhibition here.
San Francisco is also the greatest queer city in the United States. So to be able to
100%.
show my paintings in the Castro or somewhere in San Francisco would be amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess if people were to look out for your upcoming exhibitions, your art, can you share some of the social media handles, any websites where they can find your work?
Yeah, thank you. So they can go to my website, which is pothikchatterjee.com, to purchase paintings from my online shop. And I also include a portfolio of my past paintings that I've created and sold so that they can get an idea of the type of abstract art that I make. They can also order commissions for paintings through my website. And about half of the paintings that I've sold are commissions. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but that's a really cool process as well, which really is a partnership between the artist and the person making the commission in terms of the theme and the colors and the topic. And I've really enjoyed these artistic collaborations. And they can be for special occasions or for a special person in someone's life or decorating a new part of a new home. So they can go to my website for my online shop and ordering a new commission. They can go to Instagram, where I update my portfolio very regularly as well. And it's my first name and the letter C, so at Pothik C on Instagram. And I'm currently represented by Highlandtown Gallery in Baltimore. So they would be able to see my portfolio of paintings on highlandtowngallery.com. And they ship nationwide for free. So definitely check them out.
Fantastic.
Makes sense. Okay. So I guess we are coming to the end of our discussion, Pothik here. So before we wrap, do you have any recommendations for our listeners? A recommendation could be a book, a movie, podcast, any piece of media, or it could be general advice as well.
Ooh. Yes, I do have a recommendation. I recommend this wonderful poet named Godhuli Gupta. And I'm a little bit biased because she happens to be my sister, but she is an amazing poet who writes about motherhood and being a South Asian woman in America. And I think she's incredibly talented. And her Instagram handle is wordsby.godhuli. And she's getting close to 5,000 followers and has a really great following and puts out some really beautiful poetry that's very empowering and inspiring.
Gotcha. Okay, excellent. I guess with that, it's a wrap. Pothik, thanks so much again for joining. And this is for our listeners. If you guys are not already following Your Life Unfiltered, please feel free to give us a follow on Instagram, on YouTube, on Spotify. Our handle is at Your Life Unfiltered. And we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you. Thanks, Pothik.
Thank you.
Thank you.